One of the greatest fears of a mother is that everybody's going on with life and you just hope that your daughter will not be forgotten.
It's burned right into your soul and into your heart and your mind.
I'm journalist Angela Kennecke. I lost my oldest child, Emily, to fentanyl poisoning in 2018. Emily was just 21. Her death was preceded by years of struggle, the struggle of addiction so many families face today. We were just 3 days away from holding an intervention when she died. We couldn't save her.
There's a term called amelioration of grief, and it means that grief takes time, and it will get better only if you put work into it.
In this podcast, I'm grieving out loud with other parents who've lost children and with those currently struggling with the monster of addiction.
I didn't want to go into withdrawal. It was like one of the biggest fears of my life at the time.
You were terrified of withdrawal?
Terrified.
Why?
It is the worst pain, illness, the worst feeling that I could ever imagine having.
I'm also learning from experts in the field on how we can and must do better to treat this disease of the brain.
We treat the addiction and the effect of the addiction, but we're not looking at the pain.
The
root cause.
For this podcast, I am joined by an author, Chris Van Coor, who has written books in the past, but never one like her latest book of Grief, Garlic, and Gratitude. I think I love the subtitle most about this book, Returning to Hope and Joy from a Shattered Life, Sam's Love Story. Chris lost her son, Sam, in 2013 to fentanyl poisoning. And it happened quite a while ago when this epidemic was really first taking hold of this nation. So Chris has had a lot of time ahead of many of us moms. And I think we can learn so much from her. I just want to thank you so much for being here tonight, Chris.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, although I wish we were able to talk about happier topics.
Right. It's just one of those things that it brings people together. You hate the reason for it, but you meet so many different people along the way, I think, who help you in this journey.
Absolutely.
Chris, tell me a little bit about your background. I know you're an educator. You live out east, and you published a couple of romance novels.
Yes, I'm a public school principal, middle school, which is the best age ever in public education.
I'm sorry, our people listening to the podcast can't see my face. I'm making a huge face like middle school. Oh my gosh, are you crazy?
And I have published 4 romance novels under either my pen name or my own name. And I also ghostwrite and, work with other authors collaborating on their books to help bring their words to the page.
And you have 4 children.
We do. We have 4 children, 3 grandchildren, and all sorts of furry creatures as well that are part of the family.
Well, you and I are kindred souls. I love animals too. And I have 3 dogs, which is too many dogs. But tell me a little bit about your child, Sam, and what happened in 2013.
Sure. Sam was light. Sam was love. He was joy. He was relentless questioning. He was the kid that, when we would say things like, Sam, don't go wandering through the park and sit with strangers and talk to them because you don't really know those people. He'd go, why? Why shouldn't I go learn about them? Why shouldn't I get to know them? He was exceedingly bright, exceedingly well-read, loved history and art and especially theater. And he was the sort of kid that when he passed, we kept hearing people say that Sam was their best friend. And his 2 best friends really struggled with that for a while until one of them, one night sitting at our table, realized that when everybody else said Sam was their best friend, they were telling the truth because he had a gift to make that he could make anyone feel loved and safe and valued. And he saw things in people that the rest of us didn't take the time to see. And so he really, when we planned the celebration for his life, we really thought that we would only probably have sort of family and a few close friends there. And we had between 400 and 500 people there, all who were there because of their love of Sam. And that was just Sam to this day continues, even last week, 7 years after his death. We got a random email from somebody who went to first grade with him who had just found out that Sam had died. And he wrote to us about what Sam meant to him. And that was Sam. He also was a slob. He usually left his dirty dishes
He wasn't
everywhere.
perfect.
That's, I mean, for years after his death, I still found dirty dishes stuck places. He hated to wear shoes. His feet were always grimy. Great sense of humor. He could help you laugh at yourself, which is a gift.
Oh, that is a gift. So Sam, it was 2013, and Sam had been struggling with addiction for, how old was Sam when he died? 20?
Sam was 20.
20. So a year younger than my Emily. But 7 years ago, I want to put this in perspective for people because I felt in 2018, that horrible shame and stigma. And I've been trying to figure out what to do to save my daughter and what to do. And it was so difficult, especially being in the public eye.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2013, people weren't talking about this the way people are talking about it now because it's affected tens and tens of thousands of families. But I can't imagine how you must have felt. You're a principal, you're a middle-class family, just like so many of us. This isn't supposed to happen to you, especially in 2013.
Right. And Sam had bipolar disorder, and he had been diagnosed with that probably about 6 months before his death. And he was being treated for it. He was working with a great therapist. He really seemed to be moving forward in a positive way. What we found when he was diagnosed was that Sam had known from the time he was 14 that he had these mood swings, and he had found that he could, frankly, very successfully, he could control those mood swings from the bipolar disorder by smoking marijuana. And so, we didn't know. We caught him a couple times smoking, but we didn't realize how much he was smoking, how often he was smoking. And we also didn't understand, we were grounding him for smoking it, thinking that he was doing it
like recreationally.
Right.
Kind of a lot of people think, well, a lot of kids do that. That's a rite of passage.
Right. And seriously, he was at the time self-medicating. And, we didn't realize that. And then, the night he died, he had gone up to my parents' house. My mother's a career educator. My father's a career educator and minister, a trained counselor. And they, Sam was going up there to spend the night with them just to visit because he loved to go to his grandparents. And they had locked up everything in the house. My father's a recovering alcoholic. There's no alcohol in the house, but they had removed, my mother had had surgery. She had a couple oxycodone in the house. They had gotten rid of everything and locked everything up, with the exception of my father, due to herniated discs, has a fentanyl pain patch. They didn't lock that up because at that point, the only time we ever heard about fentanyl was occasionally, the news might run a story about illegal fentanyl coming in from China. And they didn't lock it up. Now, when Sam had the overdose, he had put the fentanyl patch in his mouth. We did find out after that that is a common way to use fentanyl.
Very common.
To abuse it.
Yeah.
We didn't know that at the time.
Sure.
But what we found in terms of the stigma was we're sitting up there, we're waiting for the funeral director to arrive. We're negotiating with the state police not to release this because the news yet, because we needed to get a hold of our children. And one of the state troopers, mentioned that there had been 6 fentanyl deaths in our local area. I'm sorry, 3 fentanyl deaths in the last few weeks in our local area. And that had never been publicized. The media had never picked it up. It was just listed in the police reports as drug overdoses. And, that I think for all of us was one of the first moments where we said, we live in the shadow of Middlebury College. It's an at Middlebury area. That area tends to be affluent and tends to be a little elitist. And they weren't going to talk about the fact that there was a drug problem. And, we will all live for the rest of our lives with the question of, if we had known about fentanyl being used this way in 2013, those patches would have been locked up that night too. And would Sam still be here?
Yeah, that leads me to the what ifs, should have, would have, could have's, and you talk about that in your book about guilt. I really think that if you look at me, as a mom who've lost someone, you would of course say you did everything you could with what you knew at the time. You have nothing to feel guilty about. You did everything. You acted out of love, even when you were using tough love. It was out of love, right?
Absolutely.
And I would say the same to you. But yet we carry around, I think, as moms, because we think we're all powerful when we're not, and we can't control another human being, that somehow our actions or what we said or what we did could have somehow made a difference in the outcome.
Absolutely. And I think that's, we often as a family, and Sam had and still has this incredible group of friends that are very involved with us as a family. We often talk about the woulda, coulda, shouldas, and have come to the conclusion that all of us will go to our own graves carrying our own guilt. And we've come to the collective agreement that we don't say to each other, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, that we all carry that guilt and always will.
So it's just something that you've accepted that you have to carry. Yeah, I think the acceptance, just for me, I'm 5 years, behind you, but the acceptance just for me is just accepting that she is gone and she is gone forever. And it's it's just so heavy. And are there, we have so many moms that listen to my podcast, or parents in general, not just moms, but, and grandparents and loved ones. And a lot of people ask me for advice now. And I always say, geez, I'm not the expert here. I can only tell you what my experiences have been, but you're farther down the road than many of us. What has been the most helpful for you, maybe in processing your grief and learning to live without Sam? And then still have a life?
I think the single most important piece, are two. The two most important pieces. One was on the day of Sam's celebration of life, a woman who her son passed away 17 years ago this week of a drug overdose. And she came up to me. Our families have been close over the years. And she came up to me and I hugged her after the service and I said, tell me it gets better. Because I needed, at that point, we were 4 or 5 days out from his death. I needed to know that I was not always going to be as shattered as I was at that moment. And her answer was, no, it doesn't get better. It gets different. And I remember being so angry that she said that to me, because I wanted, at that point, I wanted somebody to tell me it would get better. And, a month went by and I saw her in town and I went up to her and said, I think I will eventually get to a point where I will tell you how that was the best advice anybody could say to me. I think about Sam every day. I will for the rest of my life, I'm sure. but I have learned that grief is always there, but I can function most of the time with it now. And it's sort of become part of, it's just there. It's a constant companion. And sometimes it's not a painful companion, but it's always there. That was the first best advice I was given. The second was, I had a cousin, I come from a very, very small family, and I had a cousin who passed away at 21, and one of my only two cousins. And my aunt, who I adored, my aunt, the day my cousin Michael died, although her body continued for 30 more years, her soul left, and she never fully came back to any of us ever again. And her living son was here with us for about a week around the time Sam died. And the last day he was here, he told me that I needed to do whatever I needed to do to make sure that my other children didn't lose me the way he had lost his mom. And, you know, he's sort of my big brother because I'm an only child. His comment was, if they lose you like I lost my mom, I will come back and kick you. And it was in that moment, that information stuck in my head. I'd like to think I wouldn't have been lost to my children otherwise, but I was in such a dark place. I don't know.
I think it happens all the time. I just saw a friend of mine posted on Instagram a picture of her grandmother who died before she was born.
Mhm.
Her dad said that when she lost her 13-year-old son, his brother, she had a broken heart. She basically died of a broken heart. And I think that can happen. And is it a choice? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think we do make a choice every day, right?
Mhm.
And I think that initially, when you talked about talking to that woman at the funeral, you're just looking for relief. You just want someone to tell you, what do you do? You're educated, you're used to researching something, figuring out the solution, right? And there is no antidote for grief,
No.
especially the loss of a child. Like, it is with you, it is there every day,
Mhm.
for as long as you will live. So it's learning how to manage that
Yes.
and still have a life and still be there and still be grateful for what you still have and
Yes.
still be there for the people in your life. And it is like a tightrope that you're walking, I think.
Mhm. It is. And I'd say that, this year as we came up on the anniversary, I have chosen to be with my family on the anniversary every year. We are all together. This year, because of COVID, more of us were here. And I was realizing that I didn't cry on the anniversary, but I did cry the day before.
I think leading
And
up to it's always harder.
and that's exactly. And it was the day of, I was okay. But then going back to the guilt, then I did feel a little bit of guilt because I didn't fall apart on the anniversary. And I went, and I did actually stand outside and start to laugh and say, I cannot believe that I'm getting upset with myself because I didn't fall apart.
Guilty for not being sad enough.
Yes.
So it was natural for you to want to write a book and put it together. And I want to talk a little bit about the book. And you used at the time in 2013, you were posting on Facebook a lot.
Yes.
And sort of airing what was happening, what was going on. And you use those posts throughout your book. And it seemed like, as a writer, obviously you're going to write a book, but what do you want people to take away from this book about Sam's life?
What I want them to take away is that Sam's love and Sam's impact didn't end when his heart stopped beating. And his power and his love continues to grow out into the world. We now We've heard from people in places like India who have made connections with friends of Sam when they were traveling and those sorts of things. And I think the message I want people to realize is it is so easy in our grief to want to pull in to ourselves and sort of crawl into bed and pull the covers up over our heads. And instead, when you lose a child, letting that love and that light continue to shine, not not falsely, and not when your child has died in the way our children have, not hiding from that fact. But that love did not stop when his heart stopped.
No, and their addiction and the way that they died doesn't define who they were
No.
as a person. And we like to do that in the society,
Yeah.
label people junkie, addict, whatever, kind of dismiss people like they're less than human. And it is a disease of the brain that took over these amazing, beautiful people that we loved, our children. Nobody has a child and thinks, oh, my child's going to grow up to be an addict.
Right.
Nobody. And I just think that it can happen to any family, and we need to do much better. And I think that that's sometimes where I feel sad, and you're so many years out with my charity, Emily's Hope. We're trying to make a difference and save more lives, and I'm trying to raise awareness, and yet people keep dying from this. And the fentanyl is even more prevalent than when it was in 2013. So sometimes it feels like you can't do enough to try to change what's happening and continues to happen to so many families.
And I think it's also at the time of Sam's death, we were living where we live now, which again is, in a very educated, quite elitist sort of community. I was working in the second largest, quote unquote, city in Vermont. I was working in Rutland, Vermont, and Rutland has had a very, very serious illegal drug issue for years. I mean, we made the Rolling Stone magazine for it. And the difference was when Sam died, the Rutland community immediately embraced the truth of how Sam had died and embraced us as a family. I mean, I can remember at one point somebody making an offhanded comment of, well, gosh, somebody where we live making a comment of, gosh, will your school district still want to have you there if your kid died of an overdose? And I'm going, seriously, I'm still working on, urns and things like that. I don't need to be worrying about my job right now. But that community never showed us anything but love and support and understanding, and the understanding that addiction can happen in any family. I write about in the book, my mother in her eulogy flat out said that drugs had taken Sam. And we had people afterwards from the area where we live tell us that she shouldn't have said that people didn't need to know how he died, that we could have just said it was a heart issue. And that, to us as a family, we sat down and did at that point, in 2013, people tended to think of addicts as inner city, poor, uneducated, often people of color. And we decided that we couldn't change what had happened to Sam, but we were also not going to shove it into, the closet and pretend it hadn't happened. That maybe we could bring this out into the world and say, wonderful families have this issue.
Yeah. I liken it back to the 80s and the AIDS epidemic, when families were writing, false obituaries. It took a group of very angry mothers to come forward and start speaking the truth and calling for change. And I think that's slowly been happening in this country, since the time that Sam died, but we're not where we need to be yet.
No.
So let's talk about the second word. I guess it's the third word in your title, but of grief, garlic. And I want to talk about Sam and his garlic. What does this mean, garlic?
Sam had found in the last year of his life, he had found his vocational calling. He was working on an organic farm, and he had found that farming, working in the dirt, planting vegetables, it gave him a sense of peace that nothing else had. And he loved it. And in particular, he just thought garlic was the most magical plant on earth. And right before he died, he had been planting for the next year the garlic. But he would talk about how, you get your head of garlic, and in the fall you plant it and you mulch it and you leave it alone for the winter. And in the spring it will sprout, and in the summer you will have a head of garlic where you put one clove. And he thought it was magical. And so when Sam died, we did a service for his life. And when we did, Sam was not the funeral flowers kind of guy. And, we kept joking, his siblings kept joking that if we had tried to put like gladiolas in the meeting house, that he probably would have managed a lightning strike to burn down the building. And so instead, the building was decorated with garlic and squash he had grown and peppers he had grown, because these things mattered to him. We, after the service, the farmer for whom he worked gave us a big basket of garlic that he had planted and harvested that was Sam's garlic. And we had never, we produce much of our own food, but we had never grown garlic. And we decided that we would plant Sam's garlic because these were heads of garlic that his hands had touched. And so we built garlic beds, and just about a week after he died, Paul and I, for the first year, we planted his garlic, reading everything we could. And it was the first time since he had died that the two of us, as his mother and father, had been alone, because the rest of the time we'd always had people with us. And we sat outside planting these cloves of garlic and composted manure, and laughed about how, we were smelly and dirty. And it was the absolute perfect way to honor Sam. And so every year we harvest the garlic on his birthday, because his birthday is at the end of July, and that's when the garlic is ready. And it needs to go back in for the winter in the beginning of October. And so we plant his garlic on the anniversary.
Wow. That's an amazing tribute. What a cool tribute that is.
And it's, we have had experiences that make us laugh in this, such as, we were so proud of the first year when the garlic came up, how great it looked. And then one of the alpacas decided to take a roll through the garlic bed. And we thought they were destroyed, and they all survived. And so the garlic has been quite a journey, but it is a living tribute to Sam, and one that, his friends show up to pick up a head of garlic and they plant it. And now Sam's garlic is slowly moving across the country.
That's really awesome. I try to do that with my daughter's artwork, to keep a piece of her alive through her artwork. And we make prints and various things and show it and use it in our fundraising. And to me, that's a way to keep, her alive. So whatever, was really an expression of themselves, art, growing garlic, whatever it might be, I think is a really great thing for people to think about. I have a friend whose son suffered from addiction and died young, 21, in May. And at his funeral, he loved to grow hot peppers and loved hot peppers. And at his funeral, they gave out, little pepper plants. So we planted them, and we had them in our garden this year. Yes. So it is a really cool thing. I love that. And in gratitude, now I write a lot about gratitude in my blogs, because for me, I had been practicing, and I had taught my kids since they were very little to practice gratitude. Every night we'd say a prayer before bed. We'd all gather around the living room, and they had to think of 3 things they were grateful for. Even if they were grateful for just the fact they had a bed, they had to think of 3 things they were grateful for that day. And I've really subscribed to the practice of gratitude for a long time. But after Emily died, it was the only thing that made me feel like I wasn't going to completely, I don't know, lose it, like just completely not be able to survive it all. So when I would feel that overwhelming sense of desperation,
Mhm.
I would think, what can I be grateful for right now in the moment? What can I be grateful for right now in the moment? And I would come up with something. I'm breathing, right? I'm in this house, which is a nice house. And, I'm doing these different things, or I have these people that have brought me these things, or whatever it might be. And that's how I survived. That is really how I survived
Yes.
especially those first few months.
And that is exactly, for me, what started was probably, within a week after Sam's death, we had been using social media as a way to connect with his very, very large circle of friends. And, with our own friends that were spread across the country. But for me, I was in such a dark place that, and as a writer, I needed to every day write down 1, 2, 10 things for which I was grateful. And I used Facebook as a means for doing that because it was a way to force myself to really think about being grateful every day. And it also was a way for me, in terms of thanking people who were going out of their comfort zones to try to be there for us. And so I wrote my gratitude posts and I would post them. And what happened as I did it was light and hope began to appear again. And and we also saw how much it impacted other people to hear or see someone say, thank you, today I am grateful for this. And that, a very specific example, the woman who was my administrative assistant, I tended to most days right after lunchtime at school, I would have a little bit of a crying meltdown. And it was because Sam always texted me about 1 o'clock in the afternoon to just say hello. And I would have my little meltdown and I would try to then get myself together and go back out to work. And she went and got me really good soft tissues because my nose, otherwise I was going to look like Rudolph. And, there's a post in there where I say I'm thankful for the gift of soft Kleenexes. I didn't mention her specifically by name, but she knew that she was the giver of those Kleenexes. And we still, years later, we're still very close to each other. And she will bring that up, that little recognizing when other people are trying,
Yeah.
what that means.
And what it means, just a little gesture can mean so much.
Absolutely.
Struggling. You're at 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what's different at 7 years compared to 2 years or 5 years? Or is there much different? And was the book a healing process for you?
The book was a learning experience for me. People have asked if it was cathartic. And I can't really say it was. And I can't say that it brought me closure because I don't think for any of us as grieving parents, I think, whatever our belief systems are about whether or not we will see our children again, that's the closure. There's no closure otherwise. It was for me, some of it was remembering things that I wrote about in the journey that, with the grief and the fog of grief, I had forgotten about. And revisiting those, some of them were good things and some of them were very painful to revisit. I also had 2 incredible editors that worked with me, both of whom had worked extensively with me on fiction. And one of them is Roses and Puppy Dogs and Warm Hugs. And the other one is I Will Kick You in the Rear End from Here to, Houston. And they together kept saying to me, if you are going to do this, you are going to go as deep as you need to really do this. And so there were parts in this that it was like losing him all over again. But in the end, it brought clarity about the love that we have been shown, the issues in our society about this topic, the issues in our legal system, our counseling systems, all those things. But more than anything, in the end, it was love was what I felt more than anything. Now, in terms of whether 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, for me, the second anniversary was the hardest because I felt that once I kept holding on to the idea that once I passed the first anniversary, it was going to get magically easier. And it didn't.
No.
Fifth was hard. I mean, they're all hard. I can already say that I dread the 10th because Sam died at 20, and already my brain is doing on the 10th anniversary, he will have been gone for half of his lifetime. And then I kind of do the whack upside the head and go, I can't waste my life now fixating on that date 3 years out. I would say the biggest thing that has changed is I now, for the most part, know what triggers a real serious bout of grief. And in my first couple years, I would try very hard to sort of bottle that up. And I would do it's been 2.5 years. I shouldn't fall apart on this particular date. Easter, Sam loved to listen to Jesus Christ Superstar leading up to Easter. And, I would do I should be able to listen. I now know most of my triggers really well and can anticipate what's going to trigger me. And I also now give myself the freedom. I refer to it as kicking over the bucket, that when I feel the grief building, I will actively do something that I know will actually push me into sit down, have a good cry, blow my nose, wash my face, and get back up. In those first few years, I wouldn't have done that. And I think that's probably a healthier way to approach it instead of getting sick, trying to bottle it up.
Yeah, we hear that we should feel our feelings, not bottle them up, but they're scary, especially when that grief is so overwhelming and you feel like you might get down into that pit and never be able to get back up.
Yep.
So I get that. I understand completely what you're saying, and it makes sense. And the gratitude helps a lot too. I think the gratitude along the way. And I love it that you called it Sam's love story, because every time I speak publicly, well, not during COVID, but before COVID, I spoke all around the country and around my local region. And I would always say that my talk was my love song to my daughter. This is my love story to my daughter, because I do love talking about her and telling her story and trying to make people understand that she was so much more than her addiction or how she died. And that's what we all need to understand about everybody who dies in this way, that this doesn't need to happen. It's so unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
And if we would just put our efforts, and I know right now our efforts are really focused on COVID-19, but if we would join together, as one to, first of all, stop the fentanyl from coming into this country and being laced in drugs. And then second of all, understanding addiction as a disease of the brain and really getting people the help that they need, rather than putting them in prison or jail or wherever. I think we could turn this around. And
absolutely,
at some point there has to be a tipping point. Like, how many families is too many? If we're doing 70,000 families a year, I mean, at some point, how many is too many? It's like if a war was going on and we were losing all these young people, what would we be doing? I think so much about that, but it takes people like you to help us overcome the stigma, to write about it. And have you had a good response to the book so far?
I have. It has been fascinating to me, the different responses. You know, people that people that know Sam or knew Sam personally, they have sort of one set of reactions. And usually it's a phone call or stopping by to see us and telling us additions to some of the stories about Sam that are included. Um, we've also had an incredible response across the country from communities, recovery communities, saying that, the sharing of love, for, saying that every person is worthy and deserves love, resonates. I've heard from so many parents across the globe now saying, thank you for being brutally honest about these things, how you felt, how it feels to see your child dead, those sorts of things, and not hiding from it. And I think the thing that I've heard most often is the very last chapter of the book is about my recommendations to people, both if they are grieving or if you know someone who is grieving. And that I get stopped in the supermarket, or, was in Massachusetts, and people were talking to me about how often they use that list when they know that someone has passed away. And that to me is a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, that has to feel great that they're taking your advice, because people mean well, but they often do say the wrong thing.
Oh, absolutely.
And especially, in cases where your child died of an overdose, it's not, people just have unusual ideas sometimes about that. And that's what we're changing. That's what you're changing through this book. And that's what I'm trying to change through this podcast. So I just really appreciate you joining me for this conversation. And I am going to put all of the information about your book and your website and everything on the notes on this podcast, the details, and you'll be able to check that out. So Chris, really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. And, Godspeed on your journey as well. And, anything I can do to help, let me know.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't have to tell you, some days are okay and some days just suck.
They really do.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate the candid conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us. For resources for families and how to get help, just go to Emily's Hope at paintingapathttorecovery.org. If you found this podcast helpful, please consider giving us a positive review. Thank you.